Kia ora, I'm sitting here talking to my good friend Grant Forsyth, who both of us had the pleasure to work together actually at Telecommunications and Telstra Clear. But before that, Grant was the first CEO for TUANZ in 1993 to 1999. And TUANZ had been around for about 7 years at that point, I think, if I count right, and you were the first CEO. So what led to you being appointed?
Yeah, hi, Craig. Well, as I understand it, because of course, you know, I was the odd boy in the room at the time. The organisation had reached the point where they wanted to do bigger and better things. The board decided that the current structure at the time, which was a board, a full-time administrator, Anne Marinovich, and a part-time executive director, Pat Kerr, that they wanted to step it up a notch and grow the organisation. And at the time, Don Hollander was the chair, and I would say he had a very commercially oriented model for the organisation. And you know, first and foremost, he saw that the role for whoever led the organisation was to build membership, and that meant delivering benefits. He was always very keen on ensuring members had benefits. And then the second thing is, having kind of got to a stable membership, as I say, was to grow and diversify. And in the third step, and only the third step, once you had an organisation of some meaning, really, and some stability, financial stability, only then was he and the board keen for the organisation to engage in policy work. So that was the overarching brief, as it were. And I guess I made it through the selection process because in my past, I and 3 other colleagues had set up a small software business, which we'd grown to import and distribute software in New Zealand, including being the first exclusive Microsoft dealer, which didn't last long. So yeah, so that was kind of my starting orders in coming to the organisation.
I just pick you up on that comment around being financially secure, because it seems to me, and every CEO I've talked to, including myself, you know, TUANZ has never been particularly, I wouldn't say flush, but it's certainly run itself lean and mean and, you know, on an edge. Was it any different in your days?
I think to a certain extent, I was lucky in that regard, you know, amongst my future peers in the role, in so much that we were on a growth curve. You know, telecommunications was the new thing. I mean, you know, refer to it as telecommunications anymore, but it was the new thing. For myself, you know, I came from an ICT background, and telecoms was the new hot buzzword. So it was a great thing to be in, and we did grow it. And there were lots of organizations who were looking to do innovative things and looking for channels to market and to engage with, particularly with business. There was a lot more choice. You know, we were coming from an era where if it didn't have a Telecom New Zealand brand on it, it didn't exist. And of course, that was all changing. So it was a great opportunity, and I think that therefore set a great environment to grow, including the financial bedrock of TUANZ. And I just think of this, you know, the staff that we had at the time and the events that we held, etc. And they were great for a few years, and then, you know, things tailed off.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about the telecommunications market. I mean, it was the decade of light-handed regulation, if I can put it that way, or at least that's the way it looks looking back. But we also saw those new players trying to build the market presence. So what were the big issues that were you advocating at that time, when you were allowed to? Yeah, what were those big issues to the government?
Well, I think we all kind of know the history. You know, New Zealand was one of the first to not deregulate, but liberalize and open up its markets to competition back in, what, 89, I think was the start date. But it wasn't until 91 that I think it was the Alternative Telecommunications Group or whatever it is that came to be clear, made it. And while there were a number of international consortia looking at New Zealand, and I remember, you know, meeting with a number of them, it really was only Clear that stayed and made the investment and were driving the market. The others in the market at the time, given that it really was just Clear as the only other alternative communications provider, the others were really what I would term business ICT integrators. So data, you know, was the new buzzword, and so they were looking to deliver integrated solutions, both voice and data, to businesses. So we didn't have, you know, the plethora of alternate core providers or alternate internet providers at that time.
Yeah. Well, you must have done something right, because wasn't it 2001 the Telco Act came into being? Or did you leave and then it just happened afterwards?
Well, you know, go back to what I was saying about building the base before being permitted to look at policy. I remember the catchphrase of the time for TUANZ when asked the question about competition was, competition's good, but it could be better. And you think, wow, how damn squib is that? And the reality was that we were constrained, the board was constrained, not to mention the R word. You know, we couldn't mention regulator. We couldn't advocate for regulation. And we all know that New Zealand was out on a limb as one of the only countries in the world that ever liberalised its telecoms market without a regulator. But at the time, the government, you know, the national government and Minister Maurice Williamson had absolutely no time or stomach for considering regulation. So it was just not on the cards. And so the best that we could do was to advocate for a strengthening of the Commerce Act, and in particular Section 36, given, you know, what we were all observing by way of the Clear versus Telecom fiasco. So yeah, so from a policy point of view, that's about as strong as we got.
Yeah.
I remember at the time reading a Treasury paper on the telco market in New Zealand, where in the margins, one of the analysts had written, you know, 50 million annual monopoly profits. And, you know, through our own work, we determined that Telecom New Zealand was one of 3 of the most profitable telcos in the world, behind Hong Kong Telecom and Telmex in Mexico. So, you know, we were right up there. You know.
And I mean, you never gave up the fight, as it were, because you went to work for Clear in the regulatory space and argued strongly in that role, and then went overseas as well. So, yeah. Right.
Yeah, I kind of, you know, my interest, I had, you know, no understanding or interest in policy or telecommunications or regulation before I went to TUANZ, but certainly working with TUANZ and with its members and really helpful individuals, that's piqued my interest, and that's what you know, got my, I guess, interest in going and working for Clear. And I remember naming my role to be at Clear as industry and regulations manager, and there was no regulation. So it was a hope. It turned out to be okay. I joined Clear in '99, and as you say, 2001, we had the you know, the Telecommunications Act and our first regulator. So yeah, great milestone.
Yeah. I hadn't actually clicked to the fact we both joined Clear in the same year. So I joined at the same time, yeah, not on the regulatory space. Let's just come back to those the 7 years. You know, we talked about data before. So what technology changes really stood out during that time?
Well, I remember there was this other organization called the EDI Association, which I think, I have to go back and check Google on this, is what, you know, the data integration. And they were it was basically almost around telex machines, etc. And they, funny enough, were getting to the end of their technological era. And so they folded in with TUANZ. And, this was before the internet. I remember going overseas and looking at a American version of Time magazine and just going through the ads and noting how many ads had an email address or a URL. And it was like over 50%, whereas in New Zealand, there was almost zero. And using that as a focus for future seminars and workshops, TUANZ workshops on the internet. So, yeah, I mean, this was before, ICANN or Internet Society in New Zealand were growing. And the other thing that was coming on at the time was just digital media generally. And there was a great group of enthusiasts who set up an organization called Interactive New Zealand, which, they convinced me to bring on board with TUANZ. It was great because it was such a different group of people who ordinarily associated with, stuff called telecom. So it was branching out in all sorts of directions.
Great. All right. Well, let's just finish up this conversation about these 7 years by asking you, what was your highlight from that time at the helm of TUANZ?
Well, I thought about that, and I think the best thing I could say is it was great fun.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity of working with great individuals, great board. I formed an advisory board for people who had opinions and contributions, but didn't want, the not the rigor so much, but the process of full board. Really supportive members. I guess on my watch, Telecom left and then came back, so that was always interesting. So yeah, it was fun. We were doing interesting stuff. It was pioneering to a certain extent. Those are all great memories. We had great conferences, great TUANZ award dinners, which I was warned we could never run because our members would be too unruly by the time it came to the after dinner speaker. But we managed to get through that with great fun. And as I say, I think while we, by design came to policy towards the end of my term there, I'd like to think that we always approach it, and I think this has continued throughout TUANZ, with respect and with evidence, and built foundation to pass on to my those who took over from us. So yeah, good luck.
Thanks very much. Well, look, thanks very much for your time, Grant. Really appreciate it. And we'll certainly be seeing you around.
Indeed. Well, I'm a proud member of TUANZ and look forward to an after 5 in person.